Yes, so thank you, Chair and Committee, for the opportunity to address you today. So, very fitting, item 11, plan change 11, very neat. I'm sure that was accidental. So my point in coming here today is twofold. One is to express that the local board is basically happy with this plan change. I understand the community societies are happy with the plan changes as well. On the proviso that it's acknowledged by the committee and particularly officers that this is only stage 2 of possibly up to a 5-stage process. This isn't the end game here. This is only part way through it. Stage 1 was a land exchange to enable Fletcher to get on and build a playing ground in the base of their development in the Riu. Stage 2 is this process of modifying the plan to enable, amongst other things, them to get on and do that. One of the consequences of that, and you may well ask why, and I could sort of speculate, is that one of the very things that the community and the board holds very dear is the retention of the Western Park as open space and playing fields. This plan change actually enables Fletcher to build on Western Park. So you might well ask, why on earth was this ever agreed to? And I would say, well, it was because there was an understanding in the agreement that as there would be at least stage 3, which is a further land exchange, which would enable the building to come off Western Park, and then a subsequent plan change to that, which would take the housing designation off Western Park and finally return it to the state that the community wants. And then there's potentially a stage 5, which is other items in the agreement. Now there is an agreement in place. One might ask as well, why would the societies agree to a stage 2 that is not what anybody wants? And I could only really reflect that potentially just reflects the power imbalance between the parties involved, and that Fletcher was putting itself into a win-win situation where if the further land exchange didn't take place, they secure themselves the ability to build on the Western Park, or if it does take place, then they're happy either way. So they're in that win-win situation. So I guess, while not disagreeing with the recommendations in item 11, I'm a wee bit disappointed in the lightness of that document. For example, in the context, it refers briefly to the agreement, but it does say amends the operative precincts, Three Kings precinct, to reflect the settlement agreement. Well, it doesn't. It only amends the operative precinct to partially reflect the settlement agreement. So that's a very glaring error. And secondly, in the risk section, it does not refer to the fact that there is a risk that future land exchange and plan change doesn't take place, and that would leave the community and the board in a very difficult position where they have not. One of the key items of that agreement is to secure the Western Park, and if that were not to take place, then the community and the board would be highly irate through that whole process and feel that we've been sold down the river on it. So I'm suggesting that at the very least some additional amendments be made to the recommendations so that it reflects some of that concern. And members, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Harry, did you, I made sure that your board was notified of this report. Every board, your relationship manager, your senior advisors get this, the chairs get these reports, I think.
Yeah, I did get it last night. Well, I got notice that it was on the agenda last night.
Yeah.
And
did your relationship manager not tell you that it was on the agenda? Because I think it probably went out late Thursday. So every board, I'm hearing this quite a bit, and this is a disconnect between local board services and their job is to represent you and to make sure that they tell you what's relevant on our committee agendas. That goes for every standing committee and the governing body. So we haven't had anything come back from your relationship manager, and it just does concern me that you are not hearing about this.
Yeah. Well, in defence of her, I mean, we did.
Well,
we
it's
have
not about an individual. It's just about.
Yeah, no, and I understand, but I mean, the board did approve, you know, that the plan change went ahead. What I'm sort of raising, I guess, is the issue that hasn't been reflected in the paper, that this is only part of a process, and it's very important that you know, the committee and also officers are, you know, aware that that's only part of the process. And unfortunately, I mean, we did get a briefing from the DPO office maybe 2 weeks ago about, you know, these concerns, and I wasn't reassured, I'm afraid, that they were progressing the next stages with the enthusiasm that we would have liked. But that, you know, that didn't mean that we still didn't agree with the paper as it stands. It's just the sort of the context of it hasn't really been placed.
Okay, so just for clarification, you're supportive of the plan change as it's subject to confirmation later in the agenda, and then you are pointing out that it is a part of a bigger equation for solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, we'll ask Mr. Dogood, or alert Mr. Dogood that we just need to address those matters when we come to the paper. Question firstly from Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had the opportunity of actually sending this through to the Puketapa Local Board, and the reason that I did that is that this has been a highly emotionally charged project from the beginning, and it's really important for this committee to know that we have the certainty and the relationship with our Puketapa Local Board intact on this. I've got a few questions, but I know that Puketapa have tried to work in a really constructive way, and you engaged Richard Reid, as I recall. Have you continued to stay? I note he's in the council chamber here today. Have you stayed in touch with him on this, Harry?
Yeah, thanks to Councillor Fletcher. Yes, there has. We engaged Richard Reid to do some very good work for us. Unfortunately, some of that wasn't incorporated into the precinct work that Fletcher did. We have continued to pursue elements of his development plan as we have been able, for example, with Homes, Land and HLC, whoever they are, Homes, Land and Community, in order to pursue, because one of the critical things, well, not just, you know, we're talking about our Three Kings plan as well, is that there are elements in here that we still want to pursue wherever possible, and one of the key ones of that is, along with the open space and acknowledging Te Tātua Reo Kiuta, is unifying the community and providing linkages. And so, you know, we would be very keen to see those linkages continue, and we would like to see officers, council officers, you know, working with HLC officers. And we convened a meeting that Richard Reid attended with HLC officers, and they are open to, you know, some of the ideas that the very valuable ideas that he put forward that would unify the community.
I'm just a little bit confused that if the Puketapapa Local Board and the community groups don't want development in Western Park, why have they agreed to the plan change?
Yeah. So the upshot of that is, I gather that that was just part of the negotiation process. It was seen, I mean, ideally, the ideal would have been for it to go forward without that, but Fletcher's was adamant that they wanted if you like, a fallback position in case the future land exchange didn't take place, so that they would actually secure the housing numbers that they wanted out of the site.
And I think there is a recognition by all parties that there does need to be sufficient density on the overall site in order to meet our requirements for housing, the provision of housing, and also the economic viability for Fletchers. But what I'm confused about, if this is an interim measure as you identify, whereby the development is agreed to be relocated to another site, it's not in this report.
No.
So I'm really trying to probe what the position of the Puketapapa Local Board is, because I don't want the local board to be upset further down the track. Are you looking for us to amend the recommendations that it is much more clear that this is just one of the steps as we, or interim measure, or, I'm not sure what words.
Transitional measure, very much.
Transitional measure.
Very much so. It was, you know, accepted by the board and the societies that this was only acceptable if stage 3 and stage 4 took place. Stage 3 a further land exchange, and stage 4 a subsequent plan change to reflect that. So this is a sort of a holding pattern. I mean, this is this enables playing fields in the quarry Riu, in the floor, but and I guess that means that well, that does mean that Fletcher is unable to build on that. So there had to be some, if you like, some compensation for that, and that was, well, we would build on the Western Park, and then the subsequent was to that, well, look, let's find another site that would compensate you for the loss of housing in the Riu, and then that is stage 3 and stage 4 of the process.
So the next question I've got, and I'm sorry if I'm labouring this, but I want to be really clear on the position of the Puketapapa Local Board. For those that aren't familiar, the depot site and the relocation of the depot, is that something that the local board has put a lot of thought into?
Yes, so during the negotiation process, the depot site was identified as a potential future land exchange option, but it's not the only one, and we would expect officers to actually do a very decent scan to look around and see what other land is available that might be, because part of the depot site's quite critical to the Richard Reen plan to integrate the communities again. At the moment, if people are familiar with the Three Kings area, we have the quarry as a big hole in the middle. We're looking to reunify, those communities that have been separated, and part of that could be by providing a road access to the extension of the existing road that's Graham Breed Drive that would take it through some Housing New Zealand land, but also the depot. So,
well, I was going to come to that next with my question, is just how important is it in terms of good design and connectivity for those communities? How critical is that? And can that, if this is all locked down now and taken as a fait accompli, are we going to be able to address those issues of connecting those communities together in the future?
Well, the answer is potentially yes, but it does depend on what alternative land is found for the exchange for the Western Park housing development. And ideally, I think the at least a portion of the depot site should be used for that linkage that we were talking about. Members will recall that the board actually argued very strongly when in the unitary plan process, the Three Kings precinct, as it's identified, was actually the precinct identified in our Three Kings plan, which was a much wider area and would enable a much more comprehensive development to take place. As it turned out, the Three Kings precinct was restricted purely to the Fletcher development area and adjacent land, and that wasn't the board's preferred option at that time.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure we can take this further with Mr. Dogood, but I'm taking from the local board that they are, in terms of support for this, it is with the caveat that this is a transitional measure and that needs to be reflected in the wording in some way.
Okay, so the Executive Officer of Chief of Strategy is already working on that and has communicated with Mr. Dogood, who will be coming through later on. And I invite you, Harry, Councillor Fletcher, to work with the Executive Officer on probably motions that note the further work. We can't condition it. We cannot condition making a plan change operative on the other work. That is not possible.
A noting recommendation is very important at this stage. I
I
mean, the concern as it is, when you just look at it coldly, that this is it. This is everything in the quarry sorted. Well, it's not. So we need to get on record the fact that this is only, as Councillor Fletcher mentioned, a transitional.
This is a relatively procedural report because this is not a full report on the whole gambit.
No, that's right.
It is never intended to be such, and it is not trying to hide from the bigger picture and the unfolding of that bigger picture that your community has great expectation for. So the other thing is we are going to follow up with Democracy Services as well, because there's something that the chairs of the standing committees and the mayor repeatedly are concerned about, is that I've just checked, the email went to relationship managers, senior advisors, and the chairs 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, alerting them to this agenda. That's something that the chairs, deputy chairs, have all made sure that occurs. So if there are disconnects, we're going to check on why there are those disconnects, because I know even when we had the run through yesterday, I said, over and above that, please email Harry directly, which you got yesterday afternoon. So we just want to address that possible gap there, Harry. Okay, further question, Councillor Simpson and then the Mayor.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Harry, look, thank you very, very much, because I found what you said very clear, and I think in some respects my questions have been asked by Councillor Fletcher. I just want to say a couple of things. First, when you send that out, if I'm not mistaken on your ones, you actually added in red. You actually even changed the colour. This is information has been noted for, so it's actually really clear. So thank you for that. But Harry, I was just going to say, have you drafted up some recommendations that you've flicked through to either Councillor Fletcher or the Chair that support what you're saying? Because if you haven't, I suggest you potentially do that.
I'll get on to this.
Because I think you've made some very valid points. Thank you.
That's okay, and that's why I'm just inviting Harry and Councillor Fletcher to work with the Executive Officer. Mayor Goff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Harry, for the presentation. I think we've already arrived at probably a good solution, which is a noting recommendation that further work needs to be done. But I just want to clarify this. This settlement that was reached, and I was involved with it, as you'll recall, was reached voluntarily by all parties and was reached in good faith. It resulted in certain compromises, as all agreements do. Nobody got 100% of what they wanted, but everybody got something that they thought they could live with. It was agreed by all parties, and I've seen no evidence that any party to the agreement intends to or is likely to act in bad faith. So it may be that there isn't a problem. What the settlement says is that these things will happen, and it's now up to the parties to make sure it happens. And if anybody did act in bad faith and reneged, then I'm sure this governing body would have something to say about that. So are you satisfied, coming to the question, are you satisfied that the recommendation that just indicates this is just a procedural paper and that there is more work to be done, noting that fact, so and the wording can be worked out, further work has to be done, and we expect all parties to act in good faith in furtherance of the settlement. Does that meet your need?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Goff. Yes, absolutely. But I do have to say, as I mentioned earlier, when we received the briefing from the DPO, who I understand, have the running on this future work, we didn't perceive much urgency in it. And that was our concern from that meeting, was that, well, yeah, they'll get round to it, but the trouble is this agreement does have a time clause on it, and that time clause is running out, quite rapidly, and there needs to be some real urgency from departmental officers to actually get on and come to the best solution that we can possibly do, rather than just sitting back. As unfortunately, one planning officer was heard to say, "Oh well, if Fletcher wants this, they'll do it." Well, Fletcher doesn't care. Fletcher wins whichever way it goes. So it's the community and the board that's concerned about this, and it should be Auckland Council departments concerned about this and pushing it for the best outcome possible.
I think, Mr. Chair, you could probably give the assurance that this committee does expect that all parties, including our own staff, will honour this agreement and make sure that it's carried into effect. We didn't reach the agreement with any other intention. It was to honour it, now that we've got a compromise, to get on and get the result that we want for the community and for the housing development. But I think your message has gone through to officials about the urgency of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Clow, final question, please.
Yeah, Harry, very brief one. I mean, I was sympathetic to your board's concerns earlier on and supported you in voting to delay things a bit. One thing that's and it may have been an answer to what Councillor Fletcher was talking about, the extension of the road, the access way from the pit up to the mall area. Is that part of the road you were talking about?
Well, currently Graham Breed Drive just comes in and basically stops at the depot and at the entrance to the Western Reserve. The proposal is that driveway then goes down to service the Riu.
Okay, so there's no step.
This is where potentially there is an ability to take an offshoot off that and link it with some of the neighbouring streets on the western side, and that's where to be honest, I'm not sure how it all fits together, but it's possible that the depot site gets in the way of that if it's all going to be used for housing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clow. Councillor Fletcher, would you like to move?
Yes. I'm happy to thank the Puketapa board for their presentation.
Second, Councillor Clow.